Picture this. The year is 1535, and the city of Münster has become a living nightmare. Bodies hang from the walls, emaciated citizens stumble through streets reeking of death, and at the center of it all sits a man who calls himself the King of the New Jerusalem. He has 17 wives, orders executions with theatrical flair, and believes he's been chosen by God to bring about the apocalypse. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of how one German city became hell on earth, and how a charismatic madman convinced thousands that mass murder was divine will. The early 16th century was a time when the very foundations of European society were cracking apart. Martin Luther had shattered the Catholic Church's monopoly on salvation just decades earlier, and now competing Christian sects fought viciously across the Holy Roman Empire. Cities burned, peasants revolted, and apocalyptic preachers roamed the countryside proclaiming that the end times had arrived. People were desperate, terrified, and searching for someone to follow into what they believed were the final days of human history. Among the most radical of these new religious movements were the Anabaptists. Unlike other Protestant reformers, they rejected infant baptism, embraced adult conversion, and most dangerously, believed that true Christians should live apart from corrupt worldly governments. They preached communal ownership of property, pacifism, and the imminent return of Christ. To the established authorities, both Catholic and Protestant, these ideas represented nothing less than a complete overthrow of the social order. The wealthy commercial city of Münster, located in Westphalia, seemed an unlikely place for religious revolution. But by 1533, the city had become a powder keg of social tensions. Economic hardship had created deep resentment between the merchant elite and common citizens. When Anabaptist preachers arrived, promising equality and divine justice, their message found fertile ground among the desperate masses. The transformation began innocuously enough. A local pastor named Bernhard Rothman had already been preaching radical Protestant ideas when two Dutch Anabaptist leaders, Jan Matthies and his younger disciple, Jan van Leiden, arrived in the city. Matthies was a baker turned prophet who claimed direct communication with God. Van Leiden, born Jan Berkels, was a 25-year-old former tailor and actor who possessed an almost supernatural ability to command crowds through sheer charisma. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Within months, the Anabaptists had gained control of Münster's city council through a combination of popular support and intimidation. They immediately began implementing their vision of a new Jerusalem on earth. All books except the Bible were burned in massive public bonfires. Private property was abolished, and citizens were forced to contribute everything they owned to the common treasury. Most shocking of all, they began forcibly rebaptizing the entire population, giving citizens a stark choice: conversion or exile. Thousands of Catholics and Lutherans fled the city in panic, carrying horror stories of the fanatical regime that had taken power. Those who remained found themselves trapped in an increasingly nightmarish theocracy. The Anabaptists had transformed Münster into a fortress, convinced that armies of the ungodly would soon arrive to destroy their holy city. They weren't wrong. When Jan Matthies was killed in April 1534 during a foolhardy sortie against besieging forces, leadership fell to the younger Jan van Leiden. This is when the regime's descent into absolute madness truly began. Van Leiden declared himself not merely a religious leader, but the divinely appointed King of the New Jerusalem. He claimed that God had revealed to him that Christ's kingdom on earth required a monarch, and that he was that chosen ruler. The self-proclaimed king's first major decree was the legalization and enforcement of polygamy. Using carefully selected biblical passages, Van Leiden argued that multiple wives were not only permitted, but mandatory for righteous men. He himself took 16 wives, including the widow of his predecessor Jan Matthies. This wasn't merely about personal gratification, it was a calculated method of control. By disrupting traditional family structures and creating new loyalties, Van Leiden ensured that citizens' primary allegiance was to him and his regime, rather than to their natural kinship bonds. The king's court became a theatre of grotesque spectacle. He wore elaborate crowns and robes, held lavish banquets while common citizens starved, and conducted public ceremonies where he claimed to receive direct revelations from the Almighty. His followers, known as the elect, formed a brutal internal police force that watched every citizen for signs of disloyalty. Neighbors were encouraged to report on neighbors, children on parents, wives on husbands. Justice under van Leiden's rule was swift and merciless. Public executions became regular entertainment, often conducted by the king himself with theatrical flourish. One particularly horrifying incident involved a woman who had criticized the regime's policies. Van Leiden personally beheaded her in the town square, then led the crowd in hymns of praise while her blood pooled at their feet. He justified such acts by claiming that God had shown him the hearts of the wicked, and that mercy toward the ungodly was itself a sin. As the siege tightened around Münster, conditions inside the city deteriorated catastrophically. Food became scarce, then virtually non-existent. Citizens resorted to eating leather, bark, and eventually the bodies of the dead. Disease ran rampant through the overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. Yet van Leiden maintained his royal lifestyle, claiming that their suffering was a divine test that would end with Christ's glorious return. The king's paranoia grew increasingly severe as hunger and desperation mounted. He ordered mass surveillance operations, with his enforcers conducting house-to-house searches for hidden food or signs of rebellion. Anyone suspected of disloyalty faced immediate execution. In one particularly savage episode, van Leiden discovered that several of his own followers had been secretly questioning his divine authority. He had them tortured publicly before executing them himself, declaring that their screams were music pleasing to God. Outside the city walls, a coalition of Catholic and Protestant forces had united in their determination to crush the Anabaptist rebellion. Despite their theological differences, both sides recognized that van Leiden's regime represented an existential threat to all established authority. The siege dragged on for over a year, with the defenders' fanatical resistance prolonging the agony for everyone trapped inside. The end came in June 1535, when two Anabaptist deserters revealed the location of a weak point in the city's defences. The besieging forces stormed through the breach during the night, beginning a massacre that would continue for days. Most of the Anabaptist defenders fought to the death, convinced that martyrdom would guarantee their place in heaven. Van Leiden himself was captured alive, along with several other leaders. What followed was a punishment designed to serve as a warning for all future generations. Van Leiden and his chief lieutenants were subjected to public torture with red-hot iron tongs, their flesh slowly torn from their bodies, while crowds watched in fascination and horror. But death was not the end of their punishment. Their mutilated corpses were placed in iron cages and suspended from the tower of St. Lambert's Church, where they hung as grisly reminders of the fate awaiting those who would challenge the established order. Those cages remained hanging from the church tower for centuries, long after the bones within had crumbled to dust. Even today, visitors to Münster can see the empty iron cages still mounted on St. Lambert's Church, silent witnesses to one of history's most horrifying experiments in religious extremism. The Mad King's dream of establishing heaven on earth had instead created a hell that consumed thousands of lives and left scars on the city that endured for generations. The Münster Rebellion stands as a chilling reminder of how quickly civilization can collapse when fanaticism replaces reason, and how easily ordinary people can be led into committing extraordinary evil in the name of divine will. Thank you for watching and for joining me as we revisited one of history's darkest crimes. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss a journey into the shadows of the past. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, the past is never really gone.